So my name is Kirsty Trueluck. I'm the executive director here at Maine's First Ship. I want to thank you for joining us this evening, virtually and here at the Bath Freight Shed. This is our fourth presentation for our summer lecture series. This year, this 8-part lecture series is made possible through the generosity of the Grill family. Mariah and Chris Grill, who live on the shores of the mighty Kennebec, have been longtime supporters of our project, and they look forward to the day that the Virginia sails past their house. And our in-person audience has been enjoying this lovely summer weather. The sun has just gone behind the clouds, but Virginia has been glowing in the sun as she sits at her wharf just outside our windows. And I hope that you who are watching online will find an opportunity to come by and visit the ship and spend some time in our Jane Stevens Visitor Center and just enjoy our city of ships in the summertime. Maine's First Ship is dedicated to building and operating a reconstruction of the 1607 Virginia. This working reconstruction of the first English ship built in North America serves as a springboard for us to tell the story of the early exploration of settlement in Maine, of the first interactions between Europeans and the native people, and of Maine's centuries-old connection to shipbuilding and the sea. I believe it is. Of course. Many of you followed the instructions before I even said them, which is please let us know if you can't hear. So thank you. We respectfully acknowledge that while living here in Maine, we are in the homeland of the Wabanaki, the people of the dawn. While we cannot remake history, we can learn from it and move forward with knowledge and respect. Part of that effort, in fact, 4 of our 8 presentations for this year's summer lecture series, and certainly the one this evening, relate to aspects of Wabanaki history and culture. Building the Virginia celebrates the accomplishments of the Wampum colony, but it also allows us to open a new, more positive and inclusive chapter in the relationship between people of European and Native American descent. We look forward to continued exploration of the world that we now share. Virginia and her home here at the Bath Freight Shed are the foundation for a variety of educational and community activities, all aimed at bringing to light the intriguing and little-known story of the Wampum colony. Our visitor center, located at that end of the Freight Shed, is open Wednesday through Sunday from 10 to 3, and our docents are eager to share the history of the Wampum colony and explain how we went about building the ship. All volunteers, 11 years. That's the short version. You can keep up with our activities on social media, Facebook and Instagram, and you can visit our website at mfship.org for online exhibits and more. We encourage you to join our Maine's First Ship community as a volunteer or as a supporter. From shipbuilding to community building, from academic research to fine art, our programs rely on the financial support of curious and compassionate businesses and individuals just like you. And so I would like to welcome a longtime member of our community, Phil Helgerson, to introduce tonight's speaker.
Thanks, Kirsty. It's really a great privilege of mine to introduce tonight's speaker. He's a familiar person to many of you here tonight, was welcome and lauded speaker at the launch of Virginia a little earlier on June 4th, and helped us really put this adventure into context. Knowing that we built a ship, knowing how it's put together, knowing a little bit of what led to this effort is one thing, but putting all of this effort into its context is really important. There's no one better than to explain that and educate us about that than John Bear Mitchell, an instructor, professor of Maine, a storyteller, a drummer, a singer, a real member and reflection of his community. So help me welcome tonight John Bear Mitchell.
Benagok, how are you people? Benagok Mosawinawak, how are you people? I should do a literal translation and not like make stuff up for those who are keeping tabs on the language. I noticed there's a couple chats already in the Zoom. Just hold off on those. I'm going to be talking for about 3.5 hours, and then we'll take questions after that. Because nobody listens to me at home, so I take advantage of whenever I can. What I want to do tonight is a little bit different, sort of a perspective. And the perspective I'm going to be taking tonight, Bunny, I wish I knew you were here before. I would have said hi, and Harold, is an indigenous perspective on a couple benchmarks within history. And I'm going to focus on the mid-1700s. I know that's a lot longer after the Virginia, but the Virginia was the Wampum colony. And what I want to do is I want to kind of just generalize and not focus on one area and be very general, and maybe just looking at Pownal for a second and in the mid-1700s, and talk about the issues around these interactions with fishermen from New England, from Massachusetts area, obviously up in this area as well. But it's not safe history. It's not necessarily going to make you feel necessarily good. It's not the history or the narrative that we are told to listen to. It's another perspective. And in this perspective, my hope is, A, to allow you to feel in your heart us as people, Wabanaki as people, not as troublemakers, not as people fleeing hostile takeovers of our land, and basically not as hoarders of our own, for lack of better words, resources, because resources implies it's there for us. Nothing is there for us. We just take it. It's there for everything, and it's there to be left alone. So I want to kind of talk a little bit around that. At the same time, I want to introduce you to Wabanaki people, because if you really don't know who we are, like what is the history? And I did make an intro slide apparently, 8 o'clock this morning when I was doing this PowerPoint, ahead of time, by the way. It wasn't like right before the talk, because I was driving. It was a long drive. And what I wanted to do was to introduce you to us. Who are we? And again, everything I'm talking about is indigenous perspective, because Kachimu and Miswal Notaliwis, my name in my language is Kachimu and Miswal. John Bear Mitchell Notaliwis in English, my name in English is John Bear Mitchell. Bear is literally my middle name on my birth certificate. It's not a little hyphenated name. It's not something cute. It is cute, but it's not like it's my name literally. Bernawupskig Nanojeo, the Dilnabamok Mui, Nagakakagus. My family is from two clans, the Bear and the Crow, but our primary clan for me is the Crow clan because it's my matriarchal side, not my matrilineal, my matriarchal. And so growing up between Indian Island and Indian Township, my family was not even from Indian Township. They were from Pleasant Point or Sibaik, where there's plenty of pollock. I should have actually defined the tribes in this PowerPoint, and I didn't, but I'll do it now. So the Passamaquoddy comes from derived from a word where it means plenty of pollock in that place, and that's near Eastport. It's in between Perry and Eastport, Maine. And then Bernawupskig turned into Penobscot somehow through different dialects of people who didn't speak our language. It's the village where the rocks come out of the water. There's controversy, and it's the white rocks. Well, then where is white in that word? It's Wabayid, and Wabayid doesn't exist in Bernawupskig, so I don't know. But it does simply say, broken down, the rocks stick out of the water, literally. So there's white water there. There's rapids. And then Mi'kmaq, and then Maliseet. So, but we're going to focus on these lower areas and talk about, the mostly from here pretty much up into Penobscot Bay, which is, I grew up on Indian Island, which is in the Penobscot River. And so, yeah, we'll focus on what I know and try not to deviate from that. Because when I start to talk about what other people know or perceive, then it throws me for a loop. So I'm just going to stick with this. So, well, this mouse is not going to help me. The Tribes of Maine, you've probably read this 100 times. We've been sitting there looking at it because you're all cheaters. And you always have to read. That's why I never put the slides up ahead of time. But the Tribes of Maine form a single linguistic group of the Algonquin. Now I'm going to show you the names of the tribes that we're related to through it's an excerpt from a book. And but it's the Penobscot, Passamaquoddy, Micmac, and the Mousy. There's no particular order for that. I just do the 2 P's and the 2 M's. Maybe the 2 M's want to go first next time. I don't know. We'll figure it out. We'll mix it up. And so we formed the Wabanaki Confederation. Wabanaki is a sentence. In our language, Waban is the time before the sun comes up, actually pre-dawn, technically, when the sky is purple and the sun's not quite there yet. That's literally what it means. Waban is like, it's going to come up. And by the time you say Aki, it's up. It's really fast. And then it's winter. But when you see in our language, like Aki is kind of at the end, it's sort of like denotes where people live. I don't know how else to say it. It denotes, like, I put a town or city sometimes, but it's literally where people live. People live there. We live there. And so we're called people of the dawnland or people of the first light. We see the sun first in the continent, at least of North America, in Canada first, in the Maritimes. And then as it comes more east, we see it before any other state sees it. So the Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Massachusetts will catch on later. So somebody was showing me, there's a Sea History magazine. Use the same map. It's a very common map that we steal from somebody all the time. I don't know where it originated from. But if you look at this map, you can see Nova Scotia on your right. And you can see the dark boundary that encompasses most of New Hampshire down into Massachusetts and most of Vermont, all the way up into Quebec and all the maritime provinces of Canada is where the Wabanaki, that's our original homeland. It's quite expansive, isn't it? Now, you got to keep in mind that even with the provinces in the states, we didn't cross those borders. The borders crossed through us. They were drawn later. And therefore, we were separated from family. We have to play games to get across borders. We have international borders, not state borders. Sometimes maybe in the future, the way it's going. But right now we don't. We just have to do those games with the international borders. And those international borders are a little harder on us. I've been through the borders hundreds of times for ceremonies and for other events or just visiting family or friends on the other side of the border. And there's so many tricks you have to play and so many things you have to learn to get across the border with traditional items. If there's a baby born, you bring something across the border for that baby, it might be considered not allowable in the country. But, we have to jump through and we negotiate. The Wabanaki Confederation still exists today, and they negotiate mostly, they talk about border issues or state or province rights issues within the respective countries. So it's interesting when you look at this, and we freely moved in this land without obstruction. And now we have to, do what everybody else does, right? Keep in mind, I physically did not move in the borders of this land. It was my mother. She's probably old enough to remember that. This was probably about 800 years ago. So it was quite a while ago. And obviously when Canada became a country and Maine and the United States became a country as far as that goes, then, things happened. And there's all kinds of things like the Jay Treaty and things that happened within that allow for border movement on one side, but not necessarily the other. So there's complications. Just understand that. We're not going to get into them, but there are. Here's where we are today in Maine. These dots, we've been from that to that. Slight difference. And this is within a few hundred years. So the Maliseet live way up north in Presque Isle. It's that highest red dot. They all look red to me. But the one coming down in Aroostook County, that's the the Maliseet. And they live in Littleton, but they used to be called the Holton Band. They're changing their names. Micmacs changed their name to the Micmac Nation, I believe, this year. And the Maliseets are considering a change in name. But then we have the two blue ones in Washington County. The one further down is Sibayak. That's where my female side of my family is from. The porpoise hunters. And then the one further up is inland is Madocmigok, the village by the bigger lake. That's where I spent many of my years as a kid growing up. Not going to school, but every single time I could get down there and there was not school, I was there. From the day school got out to the day before school got back. And so I spent many, many years down there. And the further one inland up in the Penobscot Bay is Brillupskeg, that's Indian Island. That's where our tribal headquarter lands are today. Now, collectively, we probably own about 500,000 acres. And at last reflection, at least on how much land we own, I think the Penobscots own a little over 200,000 acres of land, and so don't the Passamaquoddies. The Maliseets, I think, have 800, and the Micmacs 500 acres, I believe. And it could be a little more, a little less, but you get the picture. It was 1794, I believe, when the Passamaquoddies were given reservation status. They were assigned reservation land by the U.S. government. And it was 1797, I believe, and I could be a year or two off. I don't know. I don't teach this stuff, but that particular, I don't teach dates. I don't remember dates very well. But was when the Penobscots got reservation status for our homeland. And I believe it was in the 80s. There's people here who will say, no, John, it was exactly this year. I don't know, 80 something for the Maliseets and 95 for the Micmacs, or I don't know. I could be wrong. But you get the picture. There's a few hundred years in between recognition in the state of Maine. And voting was 1954. We could vote in state elections in 1964 in federal elections, thus making us citizens in 1964. We became citizens of the state of Maine. Thus, and again, it wasn't expressed that we were made citizens. It said they established voting places. And so to be able to vote, you're a citizen. So that was later on. I was not quite born yet, but my mother was, was well into her life by then. And so this is just a reflection, just go back, look, and just to try to frame things. And here's the little thing I promise you, tribes in the Northeast. I can't move from the mic, but I'm going to try to side-eye this. But there's the Abenaki, Algonquin, Penobscot, Pennacook, Passamaquoddy, Micmac, Maliseet, Massachusetts, Wampanoag, Nipmuc, Pequot, Mohegan, Narragansett, Montauk, Mohegan, Chippewa, Ojibwe, or Anishinaabe, Cree, Kickapoo, Ottawa, Potawatomi, Menominee, Miami, Sac Fox, Shawnee, Delaware, or the Lenape, Illinois, Natticook, Powhatan, Wappinger, Peoria, Secotan. These are the tribes that we're related to. So of the main tribes, these are our brothers and sisters. And the Algonquin tribe is our grandfather. And we're all of the Algonquin tribe. We all speak the same language dialect now. I mean, we all did, but it's the dialects changes over time, and we can kind of understand what they're saying, but not completely. If you're a language speaker, I grew up hearing my language daily, no matter where I was. It was in my family. And then the Iroquois is west of us. The closest one to here is 900 miles. That's the Seneca in New York. And there's one Siouan family in the Northeast, and that's the Winnebago. We're between the Algonquin, the Iroquois, and the Siouan family. These are all different language bases. So we know we're very different people. We're extremely, we look different, we talk different, we're different people. But we're all categorized as Native Americans because that's how we're categorized. If we look at Africa and we see Egypt at the top and South Africa at the bottom and all these countries in between, we never say everybody's a this or everybody's a that on the continent, but we do in North America. Indians are Indians, people say. You don't look like one. Well, I'm not that one. You know, I'm Eastern Indian, you know, I'm Wabanaki. And so different language groups, different language bases, different people all together. So hopefully this frames a little bit who we are, at least, and who our relatives are. I do want to mention two things. One is the Wabanaki Union in the Wampum Belt. And I just gave a presentation to the Maine Bar Association a couple of weeks ago on wampum law and consequence. And I thought this would be kind of important to mention, because if I'm going to give you a picture of us in a survey sort of way of talking and letting you kind of piece together the puzzle, I thought we might as well do this. Because what wampum has been pushed aside by religion and politicians over the years within our society. It's a technology we've had all up the eastern coast from the Lenape all the way up to the Mi'kmaq. And we still have tons of belts that have been hidden, and they're now coming out. They were hidden because they contain messages of our history, our stories, our songs, and our dances. And we had to protect all that because we're not supposed to be alive today. We are supposed to be completely annihilated from this land. Presidential policies attempted it, and they didn't succeed, and we're glad they didn't succeed. And our ancestors are glad they didn't succeed. I'm the answer to one of their prayers. As my ancestors were being burned, as they were being shot, as they had their babies beaten against trees in front of their eyes, and they had to watch, as they suffered and starved because food was withheld, they prayed, and they prayed, and they prayed because that's all they had. And they prayed for the future. I'm the future. I'm the answer to one of their prayers. I need to do my work to make sure that their deaths or their hard lives were not for nothing. That's one of my goals. Here we have a wampum belt. If you look in the center of it, you'll see something that almost looks like a pipe, because it is a pipe. And we have this misnomer, like every pipe is a peace pipe, apparently, but it is not. If you're smoking a pipe for a peace ceremony, yes, it's a peace pipe. If you're smoking it for a naming ceremony, same pipe, it's a naming pipe. If you're smoking it for a war, it's a war pipe, same pipe. If you're smoking it for a wedding, it's a marriage, it's a union pipe, it's the same pipe. So whatever ceremony that stem of wood and that stone are put together represents that particular ceremony. This is a pipe here in the middle, symbol for spiritual and political peace, by which all the tribes are joined when that comes together. And then if you look out to your left or your right, you'll see almost like two pyramid-looking things. Those are houses. There's two of them there. And then you look beyond that, and there's something that looks like a north, south, east, and west, and that's what it is. It's 4 directions. And then you look further, and there's 2 more houses and 2 more 4 directions. So there are a total of 4 houses in 4 directions. And that denotes the 4 tribes. And the Wabanaki, which is a misuse of words, misuse of a sentence, misuse of our language, really. The Abenakis were part of the Wabanaki, but they kept moving west, and we couldn't protect them anymore. They were of the Wabanaki people, but they kept going further and further west, and ended up in Quebec, southern Quebec. And the The only thing we can think of is, and talking with my great grandfather about this when I was a kid, and he's remembers his grandfather talking about it. My great grandfather was born in 1901. His name was Francis Ranko, and he was telling me, he said, "Gus, son, we never had a W sound in our language." He said, in our language, because he spoke Old Penobscot, like so different that I don't even understand the Penobscot they speak today. The dialect I speak is a Passamaquoddy Maliseet dialect, by the way. I don't understand the Penobscot dialect. It's being taught, it's being revived. He spoke the old Penobscot dialect, which again is even a little different than what we're reviving now. So I don't, it's a little bit different, but that's because we're different people and we have a different way of speaking. And he said, when we spoke Wabanaki, it's an O sound, Wabanaki, 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 Wabanaki. And for some reason, those English, French, Portuguese, Spanish, they heard Abenaki. They heard from the sharp sound forward. They didn't hear the Wabanaki, Wabanaki. So they started calling us Abenaki. And it's really, Abun is half a word. Wabun is the full word, pre-dawn, Aki. So it really doesn't have a meaning in our language because it's half a word with a full word ending. But it became tribes. So it formed what they call the Eastern Abenaki, which was us, and the Western Abenaki, which became the Abenaki. So they were protected under us, but they're not included as a separate nation in our Wampum Belt because they were part of us at that time. So when we say there are 5 tribes now associated with the Wabanaki Confederation, there were 4 tribes associated with the Confederation. 5 are included within the Confederation meetings. There still are only 4 in the Confederation. And then on top of that, we have our unity symbol. And if you take away the little E and 3 on a door around this design, this double curve, it teaches us, or it's a symbol of unity, just that we're unified. But when you take the circle away and put the door in, that's the circle of the actual government sort of structure, for lack of better words, of the Wabanaki Confederation of People. And if that door was open, it would look like a number 8 because both the 3 and the E would flip around, face each other. That means the door is open. Last time that was open, according to Wampum Belts that were read as a kid, I've listened to all my whole life, was about 800 years ago, when it had to be open for a number of years to allow the what became the Abenaki to be able to still be protected under us if they needed us, if it was physically possible. But we're people of the water, the rivers, the ocean, and the lakes. And so our double curves are waves, water, and they surround, and there's always symmetry to them, and they have different symbolisms within them. And the bar in the middle holds us together. Each one of the bars on the X is a tribe, and together we bind each other. So this is the unity logo for the Confederation. So we have the Wampum Belt for the Confederation, which is an ancient depiction, to a more modern, within 1,000, 1,200 years or more, double curve unity symbol of the Confederation. Okay, so now you know about us, and you guys cheat, so I'm going to go back because nobody was looking at me. I mean, I could take my shirt off. I think you guys would be looking up there. Hopefully, you'd be looking up there. But are there any questions about what I've talked about so far? You got an introduction. Is this helpful? Okay, so you get to learn a little bit about us. We were out on this water. Those people we just looked at fished and trapped and hunted and lived and subsided and traveled out here. And there wasn't 1 inch of coastline in what we call Maine today that we did not occupy. I often tell people, they say, well, I've been way out in the Western, I've been everywhere. I've been places nobody has ever been. I said, you have never put your feet in this state on a piece of ground that my ancestors have not touched already. There's no way. Our names and our language exists in all the land and naming places across every single river, every single stream, lake, and every inch of the ocean, especially, and island. So now it comes, oh, go ahead.
In all your 5 or 6 different places in Maine, tribal territory.
Yep.
No, we need a mic. Would you repeat the question when you said?
Sure. Oh, he's got a mic now.
All of the land, and tribal territories in Maine.
Yeah.
Do all of your family members live in those tribal areas, or are you scattered throughout Maine?
So of all the tribal land areas in Maine, does my family live in all those areas, or are we scattered throughout? No, I don't have any relatives that are Micmac or Maliseet, but I do have relatives that live in both Passamaquoddy and Indian Island. But keeping in mind that the tribal nations are the headquarters, that people live everywhere. So I have a sister that lives in Florida, but my 2 brothers and my mother live on Indian Island. I escaped about 18 years ago, and I live on one of our older traditional islands that we actually lived on, which is now called Marsh Island, or Old Town, and the U Maine campus is on that island as well. So I still live within traditional territory, but I don't live on what is established as a government reservation, but I still live on traditional land. It's hard for us to live in Maine not on traditional land, really. And so, land in which we occupied. But I left the island at the age of 39 because I have a lot of family. And it was me, my grandfather, my uncle, my grandfather's brother, my cousin, and I could go up one side. This is one street. And then across from me, there was another cousin and a cousin. And, then I was my uncle's son, so he's another kind of a cousin, and his family. So I had to leave. Who's in your driveway? How come you didn't get home? How come you got home late last night? Where were you last night? Your car never showed up. I eventually got burned out and I left. So my family comes from the Penobscot and the Passamaquoddy tribe. And that's, sort of where I grew up between them. But I didn't grow up as much in Pleasant Point. But in order to try to connect with the ocean, I had a brilliant idea when I was in my 20s. And that was to paddle from Ambergegis Lake in Mount Katahdin to North Haven Island, about 240 miles. I did it 5 times in a row, 5 years. So once each year in May in a row, 35 days each probably around there to do that trip. So I got a lot of perspective, mostly ocean travel in a 16-foot canoe, which means nothing to the pilot whales. It means nothing to the seals. It means nothing to the porpoise that just want to play with you. And the wind or the tide or the current or the oil barges. It means nothing. And it was a really humbling experience to be out there and to see the land from that side. Because we often just look out there and say, wow, big water. But being out there is a totally different perspective. So I'm just going to go into talking a little bit about some of the political issues and tensions around us at the time in the mid-1700s. I'm going to use Thomas Powell as an example. And this is just one example. He had dreams. He envisioned a lasting victory for his empire through the conquest of the Penobscot River Valley, where I'm from. And that's the heart of Wabanaki homeland. And when he tried to do this, consider this, you come into somebody's yard and you say, I'm going to conquer this territory, but you're in somebody's yard. What do you think is going to happen? Are you going to go, okay, I'm out of here. See, I'm just going to pack up and leave. Been here 12,000 years. I can move over there. There's going to be tension because we're not going to give that up as easily for those purposes. Now, considering that our immigration policies were terrible, really bad, but we had humanity on our side. We saw people that were hungry, sick, with children, and as human beings, they have a right to food, to be warm, and to be loved. And that was our immigration policy. And we did that. And it bit us. It bit us big time. If they come wearing the mask of friendship, then good things will happen. If they come with a mask or face of death, then we'll see destruction like no human has ever seen destruction. And they came with the face of death. And that's in our prophecies. That's in our wampum belts. The Anishinaabe hold those belts that say those words. We knew that, but we knew there was options. We knew there was hope. And when there is hope, you latch onto it. So this created massive economic and political tensions between the settlers and the tribes of the region. Specifically, we're talking about, in this case, the Penobscot region. And all this during a time of tensions, war, and extermination policies among the British. So there were extermination policies before this was a country, and then twice when it was a country. Like literally extermination, genocidal policies in our government. And you know what? Every dead Indian was killed legally. Every child beaten to liquefied against a tree in front of their mother as she's being held back and her eyes are forced to be held open was done legally. So people are cruel. And it's hard to sit here and talk about it, honestly, or to stand here and talk about it. I'll never forget the time I was in college. Well, I've been in college forever. I teach there 22 years. But I remember the time I was in college as a student, as an undergrad, in my second life, because my first degree, I was an electrician, industrial electrician, graduated from a technical institute, vocational school, or whatever they call them now, community college. And I hated that job. But I'll still come fix your, change the ceiling fan, fix your light switches or whatever if you need to. But at 24 years old, I went back to college and started a whole bunch of degrees from there, different one, all in education. And I remember being in a 101 history class. And the professor said, I want somebody, you're going to be working in groups and you're going to find a piece of history that nobody knows about that's in the United States, and you're going to present that history. And I was like, oh, I know a piece of history. And so I brought that piece of history, and we're going to talk about it in a minute. And we worked in our group, and we had it all figured out. This is what we're going to teach us, how we're going to do it. And we had like 20 minutes to do it. And there was 5 of us in the group, and most of them were student athletes. And I remember they just didn't have the time. Cindy Blodgett, Paul Correa, Gar Snow, me, and there was one other person. I was the only like scrawny guy, scrawny human in that bunch. But these were all like players that went on to the NFL, NHL, or played basketball or whatever it was. And I remember like, I'll read this. I'll read it. You guys just do the pieces from there. And I got through the first 2 sentences and I started crying. I'm in college. Like as even a non-traditional student, I wasn't supposed to be crying over history. But you know what? When you read about your family, when you can actually name somebody in your family who was killed in massacres, and you can actually name somebody in your family who was taken to boarding schools, even though I never met them, I loved them. I cared about them. Like we all should with our people before us. And it just hit me. It hit me hard. So why the mistrust? Why is there mistrust among Indians with the settlers in this time? And let's look at 1755. So it was popular to issue scalp bounties for the colonies. So there was many scalp bounties on different tribes that were issued throughout the 1700s. And they basically, the scalp bounties declared the tribes to be enemies. They literally declared war on the tribes and offered money to those enlisted who partake in killing and or captivation of tribal citizens. I'm using that word citizens purposely. We're not tribal members. We don't join. We don't have a fee that's due to be part of this. We're born there. So what was the policy? Well, it was simple: genocide. And there's genocidal policies that existed on this land. When you step out of this building and that dust flies off the bottom of your feet, that dust being the remnants of my ancestors who were part of those genocidal policies. So we're going to talk about the Spencer Phipps Proclamation from 1755. Here it is. Read it, and I'll wait. Okay, Don, what do you find most intriguing about? No, I'm just kidding. So what did it say? Well, it says this. I'm going to read it to you, okay? And you can read along with me. Spencer Phipps, Esquire, Lieutenant Governor and Commander-in-Chief in and over His Majesty's province of the Massachusetts Bay in New England. Whereas the tribe of the Penobscot Indians have repeatedly in a prestigious manner acted contrary to their solemn submission unto His Majesty's long since made and frequently renewed. I have therefore, at the desire of the House of Representatives, and with the advice of His Majesty's Council, thought fit to issue this proclamation and to declare the Penobscot tribe of Indians to be enemies, rebels, and traitors to His Majesty King George II. And I do hereby require His Majesty's subject of this province to embrace all opportunities of pursuing, captivating, killing, and destroying all and every of the aforesaid Indians. And whereas the general court of this province have voted that a bounty of encouragement be granted and allowed to be paid out of the public treasury to the marching forces that shall have been employed for the defense of the eastern and western frontiers from the 1st to the 25th of this instant November. I have thought fit to publish the same, and I do hereby promise that they shall be paid out of the province treasury to all and any of these said forces over and above their bounty upon fulfillment, their wages and subsistence, the premium of bounties following. For every male Penobscot Indian above the age of 12 years that shall be taken within the time aforesaid and brought to Boston, 50 pounds. For every scalp of a male Penobscot Indian above the age of aforesaid, brought in as evidence of their being killed as aforesaid, 40 pounds. For every female Penobscot Indian taken and brought in as aforesaid, and for every male Indian prisoner under the age of 12 years taken and brought in as aforesaid, 25 pounds. For every scalp of such female Indian or male Indian under the age of 12 that shall be killed and brought in as evidence of their being killed as aforesaid, 20 pounds. Given at the council chamber in Boston this 3rd day of November, 1755, and in the 29th year of the reign of our sovereign Lord George II, by the grace of God of Great Britain, France, and Ireland, King, defender of faith, God save the King. On the land you will step out on today, tonight. This took me many semesters to learn how to read without emotion. Because this is my children. Those little children who want to play, who look forward to their first girlfriend or boyfriend, their first love. They're nothing different than a bounty placed on a seal in the ocean during that time. They're so disposable. They're so unhuman, according to somebody. And these men and women, many died. There's spotty records of how many bounties were paid, but there were many bounties paid. There was a lot of rich military folks after their tours were up or their terms were up, that took that money because, you know, they could do that while they were enlisted. It wasn't just for anybody. It was, you had to be part of the, you had to be enlisted. But still, does that mean that people weren't killed and their scalps sold to military people? We don't know. There's just all this stuff. But this is enough evidence right here. We can speculate around this thing for days. To how many people is this new information? So many of you knew about the scalp bounty. So I'm standing here reading this scalp bounty that talks about my ancestors, my family. And I wonder how many of them succumbed to it. So why was there a scalp proclamation? Well, there's a whole bunch of different things. It's not one reason. There's not one thing. There was, but again, there's really no justification for that evil. But there was several reasons why they do it. The British fear of Penobscot siding with the French and local tensions over cattle killing and murders went both ways, right? So there were Indians, there were Wabanakis killing cattle and killing white people. Why? Was it retaliation? Was it encroachment? Was it other reasons? So there was widespread hunger during that time of King George's War, both by settlers and the Wabanaki. Again, there was a lot of overhunting by settlers. There was massive overfishing. So food sources were not as abundant and people were more. There were many more people in the area. And so there were a lot more mouths to feed and everybody was a competitor for the food. I've said this before, desperate people do desperate things in desperate times, which is not a justification for stomping out the life of another human being. But at the same time, I get to witness myself what my ancestors must have felt like. When we were filming Colonial House in 2003, which depicted the year 1628, we had 23 people come to Passamaquoddy land and settle there as a business venture from Britain. We went to do a trade with them. I played an Indian. I played a Passamaquoddy. But according to the US government, I can only be on one census list no matter where my family's from. And I was put on the Penobscot census list as a child. And so on paper, I can't be Passamaquoddy. But the Passamaquoddy Council let me play one on TV. Cool. They said, well, you know, half your family's from here, John Bear. You can do that. Cool. I'm a Passamaquoddy. And so I got to play Passamaquoddy, pretend I don't know how to paddle a canoe. You know, really good at hunting though, and snaring and fishing like my uncles were there. But we ended up going in to do a trade on the show. And the camera crew was there. And I was sitting outside the governor's house, back two. I'm dressed in my whatever they put me in for the time period. And I'm sitting there with 3 other men. And we brought in a bunch of moose meat because the tribe said, you guys go hunt a moose for them in the middle of the summer. Cool, we go hunt a moose. And we caught big salmon. We got a couple 3 or 4 foot Atlantic salmon that we got from some fishermen and tribal fishermen. And we brought those in. So we had these big salmon. We didn't bring in all the moose meat. We probably brought 30 pounds. And we brought some furs in there and we were gonna do a trade. And so I had a trucker's list, the value of what things were worth. And they didn't know that in the show. The colonists didn't know that. I was leading up against the house and these are modern day people like you and me. And I could hear them in there. I heard the governor say, I'm going to try my best to screw them over. We're going to walk away with a killer deal on this first trade. We're going to establish dominance. And all this, I just felt like a thermometer that was just put into a oven. It just went up. And I thought, you And I won't say the rest. Are you kidding me? I got angry. I was like, why am I angry? This is a show. I'm angry because this is what must have happened to my ancestors. So they come out and the governor just, he wouldn't play. He's like, nope, you're getting nothing to start the talks. And this is what we got. And this is it. If you don't like it, you can leave. Well, I was given charge of that trade by the other two Passamaquoddies, Donald Sartoma, who is the Passamaquoddy Cultural Preservation Officer. He's like, you do the trade. You're better at that. And the other two Passamaquoddy guys who were just there for looks, they were handsome men. They look good on camera. So I looked at the governor and I said, no, that's not how it's going to work. We want this value for that and this value for that. And nope, you're not going to get it. Don't even try. So I stood up and I said, come on, guys, we're out of here. We picked up all the meat. We picked up the salmon. We picked up the furs and we started walking out. And the directors, the production from the BBC, they were going, go back, trade. They didn't give us that stuff to trade. That was our stuff. We hunted that meat. We fished those fish. We got those hides. Those literally belong to us. We literally got them. And we got these British people telling us, go back, trade. Oh, no. We listened to you before. Now we're speaking your language. That's enough. And so I walked out and we went back in a few days later and there was an uprising in that community when the cameras weren't there because they were like, no, you're not doing this. You're not trading. They didn't allow the governor to trade anymore. He ended up leaving the show early. But through all this, I learned what animosity and what anger my ancestors must have felt. When you come out unbendable, it's not a good way to try to communicate. This is what's happening. It's us. It's all us now. Yeah, we know we're in your house, but it's us. So you have this time of hunger in the mid 1700s. So cattle killed by both sides, right? So these farmers who are raising their cattle are getting killed and taken, stolen. Yeah, a lot of natives were doing that. That's slow food right there. They don't get away too quick. It's easier than getting a moose or a deer, but they're cattle and there's a lot of meat on them. And other farmers, other people that were not native in the area were also partaking in this, but everything was blamed on the tribes. Everything was blamed on the natives. But it was happening on both sides, but natives are often blamed. Do you know how it is when you get picked on by a bully and you retaliate, smack the bully, and the teacher turns and says, oh, I saw you hit. Well, I got hit first. I didn't see that. All I saw was a retaliation. This is everything we ever went through was that. Every single time. Well, we didn't see that first action. We just saw the retaliation or whatever it may be. There was an Owl's Head murder, 1755 in the summer. A native was killed. Revenge killings, again, happened both ways. Constantly. Revenge killing. Indians are killed because white people are killed. And white people are killed because Indians are killed. A total retaliation. This is lawlessness at its best. This is total lack of leadership or any kind of structure in the beginning of this country in the mid 1700s. New England fishermen were killing natives up the coast. And these local tensions created fear everywhere. The governor of Massachusetts wanted to act on these tensions through genocide. He encouraged, scalp proclamations in that area, which obviously Maine was part of up until 1820, Massachusetts at least, Commonwealth. So even though colonists were a major part of the problem by conducting illegal activities, those were not addressed. Instead, we were addressed and blamed for everything. And if we get rid of the Indians, there'd be no problems at all. Kind of attitude. And so from our perspective, growing up and listening to the elders talk and talk about what their elders talked about and what their elders talked about, all I ever heard was there was nothing we could have done. We'd take the blame for everything. We died, we ran, we escaped, we helped. And we helped, and we helped. Not everybody was bad. There were a lot of what they called at the time sympathizers, we call them allies today, for Indigenous peoples. You know, it's Annabelle Galloway, you know, and her son on the Martha and the Eliza in the 1700s. She could tell you a story. She could tell you the story of what these savages did to her and her son. And the horrors of that allowed her to live her life and him his. Because there were no horrors. There was just complete understanding. There's so many examples that we could give of positive interactions among settlers and Indigenous people. But when mosquitoes are biting at your neck constantly, at some point you break. At some point, you just can't take it anymore. And that's all that was written about. That's all that's popular. The Indigenous perspective is left out of everything I've read in regards to these tensions. It's always an observation approach of documentation. Never really, what did you hear was happening in the tribes? What was the attitude? What was the underlying tones? What was the feeling? What's being discussed? So, you know, this is not a bad thing necessarily, because everything that's published, and I use in my classes, everything I use for really good resources, not done by Native people, but the people that write it interact with Native people while they're creating that writing. And we get some really good stuff. And someday we'll have enough people to write our own stuff. And when I look back at the examples of folks that did write about us and interview us and cared for us, there are people in this room. And I use their books. I've used them for 20 years plus, because they're the best resources we have. And that's what we need more of. And that's what we need to do on our own to create this love, this understanding. So the last slide I have is that we've lived a legacy of mistrust, unfortunately. Colonists and the British rule established themselves as entities of mistrust and broken promises to us. Treaties are made between nations, nation-to-nation agreements, not state to country, but nation to nation. And the precedent was set that we were nations when the US government, and before that, the British government was making treaties with us, not holding them up, but making treaties. Just making the treaty recognized our independence and sovereignty as an Indigenous people. Colonists attempted to establish themselves as the domineering forces of the waterways, and this led to many clashes in which Wabanaki began to raid ships for goods. If you remember back at the launching, I mentioned the opportunity economy. It's referred to as pirating when it's written about, when we pirated these ships. We pirated those ships that took our stuff. We call it taking our stuff back, or opportunity economy. They took our fish, they took our meat, they took our wood. We went back and got it. Pirates, automatically, because it was on a ship. We became pirates. That gets into another whole certain thing, and I can't wait to read about Wabanaki on the water at some point through different wars, through different time periods, because I have a lot of stories about that. A lot of stories have been passed down through my family and others. So Wabanaki survived. Now you hear us tell our story. We get to stand here and we get to say what our story is. And I'm honored that you came here to listen at least a little bit to a little piece of it. And I hope you gain a little bit of understanding about really where in space and time Indigenous people were and what were the sorts of complicated issues that we were dealing with throughout the history of this waterway up until the Penobscot Bay. You know, there was no difference Wampum was the earlier example in the early 1600s. But again, I wanted to focus on the mid 1700s because that was really a time when there was so much tension and so much misinformation, or so much one-sided information, I should say. Not necessarily misinformation, but one-sided information that went out to make us look the savage, to justify that savage. And so I appreciate you coming here, and hopefully I gave you a little bit of an education. We still got, oh, we don't have any more time. You go home now. Bell rang. But I'll take a few questions if you want to stick around. And there's one question online. The Wampum Belts. Have Wabanaki historians collected and brought together the stories going back in time as the belts have come forward? Do the tribes have a sense of how many millennia the tribes have been in this part of the world? You mentioned 12,000 years. Yes. There are those who say that different people lived here in different time periods, but then there are us who say it's us and our ancestors. 12,000 years is generous radiocarbon dating, I guess, conclusion, and which we use. But before that, when glaciers were around, not long, ago, before that, 12,000 years ago, we had stories about living on top of ice. So we believe we've been here a long time. And wampum belts, we had the Iroquois hold on to a lot of our wampum belts when the invasion happened, when the occupation of our land was taking place, to protect them, and they kept them. They created some themselves, but they acknowledge that they have many of our wampum belts still in their possession. And we still have many of the stories of those wampum belts that we can recreate. Museums have many of them. And at one point in time in the mid-90s, I got a Vatican inventory of our wampum belts through the black robes, taking our wampum belts, stealing them and taking them back over there. And I had 400 pages of an inventory with the word Penobscot, pages with items listed on those pages, documented items, catalog items. And a good majority of those were wampum belts. So anything that was ceremonial to us that could be taken off a body or discovered or stolen was taken. Some of those wampum belts were created for them, but many were not. So hope that answers your question, RM. Any other questions in the audience? You got to use a talking stick.
When did the Indian Wars end, or did they end?
We're hoping by next year, maybe 2 more years, we'll get all our rights back. We were involved in wars for over 100 years straight that none of them were ours, that we were pulled into. The last formal war, I might have to ask Harold this, or Bunny, I don't know. Maybe, I have no idea. Again, this is history, I'm education. But as far as like wars go, I put together a list of all the wars we've ever fought. And there's a book, a Maine history book that has another list too. But it's a general list. But I don't know, we fought in every single war that right up until the 1700s. And then we fought in wars for the states, every single war, even as non-citizens. We fought in their war for a country that fought against us. It's amazing. But, when it comes right down to it, we look at you and you're humans, and I respect every single thing you've doing in life, that you've done in life, and the walk you've created for me, the path you created for my children. You all have a hand in that. And so I can't look at anybody with animosity because you didn't create the problem. But I do ask audiences once in a while to acknowledge that your ancestors created the problem, to acknowledge that your privilege in this world that you've walked was a result of the tragedies that happened in the past on this land. And just by acknowledging that, we can move forward in real love. Because again, if we do it with our mind and we think our way through the process, we forget a whole bunch of who we really are. It's when we feel our way through it with our heart together, do we gain that understanding and that compassion for each other and our histories, and to try to make it better. Even if we can't do it in our life, to at least get those questions answered that we can and create some new ones for the next generation to answer. That's really where I kind of put it. I don't even know if I answered your question. Any other questions, comments, complaints, hallucinations you want to share? Oh, go somebody back there.
Thank you so much for such an excellent presentation. Could you talk a bit about the difference between the English and French interactions with the Native people?
Oh, with us, well, there was through different time periods, there was different interactions that happened. But I would say that for the most part, other than the Revolutionary War, which baffles me that the Wabanaki are never mentioned. Like, you cannot study the Revolutionary War and not know about the Wabanaki. Oh my God, you cannot. But we don't ever hear of that. Instead, what we hear about is the Iroquois helping write the Declaration of Independence. But we never hear, oh my God, the microcosms of how the war was won and what the tribes, the Wabanaki tribes, did up all along the coast of New England to assist the people in 1775, where in 1755, they're cutting off our damn scalps, where we helped them win the war. We were acknowledged by George Washington as a catalyst for helping the colonies win the war. But yet we're never mentioned, ever, in any of the history. When it started up in Machiasport to where it ended. However, you know, when you had the French and Indian War, the French were siding with the Wabanaki were siding with the French because we had to. There was a lot of political pull that way. And the English were siding, or the Iroquois were siding with the English. But the Wabanaki and the Iroquois, we had an ancient treaty called the Peace and Friendship Treaty that we had established together, which buried our weapons in the ground ceremoniously. And we planted a pine tree on top. So when that pine tree grew, the roots would grab those weapons and would never reach for those weapons against each other ever again. The tree of peace. And yet we were forced to fight each other. We didn't necessarily partake. I have a lot of Onondaga and Mohawk friends, and I often remind them of our superior capabilities over them. And the Mohawk have this word they call us. And Tom Porter, this elder, that met Mohawk guy that I know in New York, I was speaking with him. I was paired up with, earlier on in a generation, I was considered to be a next leader in Indian country, and I was paired up with a leader that was already established. And back in when I was in my 20s, and I was paired with this woman named Wilma Mankiller, and she was a Cherokee chief in Oklahoma. And I just remember standing with her, and I was like, "You protect me. You know, you got that name. Mine's just Mitchell. Like, how English is that?" And but Wilma, you know, we did this talk out there, and I remember Tom Porter said, you know, he was talking to this big audience, and he said, you know, we have this word for the Penobscots, specifically for the Penobscots. I don't know what it means. He spoke his language, but he said, I don't know what the word means. And so he said the word, and he was talking about it. But 3 months later, he came back, and I met him, and he said, I found out what the word means. I'm going to say it once. You'll never hear it come out of my mouth again. I said, okay, I want to hear it once, so say it loud. Don't slur. And he said, that word in our language interprets the people we fear. Good. Great. You know, so there's all kinds of tensions that happened between the French and English that they brought over here and involved us in. Not only us, but the Haudenosaunee as well, the Iroquois, and others too. So again, there's microcosms, historical microcosms in that, but I won't necessarily get into it. It's a whole nother lecture, but it's interesting. Any other questions?
John Bear, I don't know if you hear. Would you share with us some of the resources that you use with your students? You mentioned lots of books that you use. Is there somewhere that we could see a list of those?
Yeah, sure. I've been working with the Maine Department of Education. So if you go to the Maine Department of Education website, the DOE, Department of Education, and just search bar Wabanaki, we have hundreds of resources up there. Unfortunately, you won't see books. But there's citations. The reason you won't see books is the Maine DOE got in trouble because we recommended books for authors that we felt as Indigenous people felt where you need these books. And, you know, you look up names like Prince or McBride or Speck or who's the other ones? You know, like there's some books, stories, like if you were looking at ancient stories like Molly Spotted Elk. But the Abbey Museum, I'm not the Abbey, the Hudson, HUDSON Museum on campus lists a whole bunch of books per age level, if you go to their website. Now, the reason the DOE doesn't is because we put up some books that we all use. So every teacher, every native teacher that uses books with authors, we put their books, like what books do you use in your classroom? Well, I put these books. And then we had authors complaining to the Department of Education saying, my book sales are way down. Theirs have got to be way up. You guys are advertising their books by recommending them and you're not recommending mine. Well, your book is awful. No, but no, we don't use your books, you know, like, but then the DOE felt like they could get, you know, get in trouble for doing that. So they don't list books anymore. But private sort of organizations or educational institutions like the Hudson Museum or the Abbey Museum, they list resources and all the books that we use as educators throughout the state of Maine. Well, we even use some from Canada, Levitt as well. There's just all kinds of good stuff out there. I use bits and pieces. I use 2 books in particular from my Wabanaki Studies course, Bunny's and Harold's books. I've used them for years. And one's Indians in Eden. And it's sort of a revised edition from Asku's Landing, Asku's Domain, or what is it, Domain? I always say landing because that's a place, but that I knew as a kid. But Domain, which is online, you can get that off it's free online. But Indians in Eden and Women of the Dawn are the 2 books I use in my 102 because I really I build my course around those books, that information particularly. There are several handouts and readings I give. But as far as resources go, I will just say that we use many resources and pieces of those many resources. So I keep that in mind. I think Bunny's talking next month here, and I'm going to come down and join her a little bit at her request. So I'll be here off to the side again, just doing some side stuff for her, drumming and a story I think she wanted me to do. So she'll be talking, and maybe if you come next month and you know, you could look at in between her books and Harold's books. Harold, that's it next door. You know, because we use their articles and books, as well as many others as well. Again, we have there's many Micmac writers that have stuff out there as well, and Penobscot, and depends on what you want, really. But if you want educational resources, go to the Hudson Museum and look under their educational by grades, because then you're going to find every book I mentioned and then some. We got a lot of biographies, some autobiographies. just, there's a lot of cool people that you should know about in those books. There's a lot of people that struggled so that I can exist and come down here and tell their story. Yeah.
And I can't leave the evening without, you touched my heart tonight. And I will always carry your words that you are the answer to their prayers. And we thank you.